Alright, going in. Destruction Warlock. Let's see here. Usually I like the Fell Hunter pet here. Just so that we can do an interrupt every now and then. And yeah, let's see how things go. These guys aren't like too geared. Yeah, I think we're fine. So, Destruction Warlock. Very well known for its big damage Chaos Bolt spell for single target damage. It's definitely on the weak side though currently for Dragonflight. We need to be in currency. Yeah. So we'll talk a bit about why the Destruction Warlock is one of the absolute worst specs in the game right now. It's at the very bottom, generally, of the raid damage charts. And it's not too good in dungeons either. Usually the problem in dungeons is AoE. So got the Rain of Fire ability, but that costs 3 soul shards, and it's just not very good. Gonna drop the freaking pile right there. Great job, dude. I hope our tank knows that these are supposed to be killed next to the boss. Doesn't look like it. This boss fight's kind of weird in how it goes. At this point, it's not really worth throwing down my immortal. That intermission phase in the middle is like, if you don't use your big single target damage cooldown stuff at the very start of the fight, and it kind of becomes too late if you wait till after the intermission. But we'll be fine. We can throw down our infernal here in this little phase to kill the stupid little frogs. Let's get this party started. Infernal. AoE stuns help a lot for this. That guy could be roasting that guy. I could have B-roasted the healer, but I didn't really feel like it. Rather save a B-res for boss fight if we need it. It's a minute cooldown. So yeah, your basic AoE that you get as a Destruction Warlock is Rain of Fire up here. You can actually make a build that doesn't even get it, if I recall correctly.
The winds are always in my favor.
Yeah. So, and like I said, it's not very good damage considering it takes 3 whole soul shards to use it. But you have to have some kind of AoE in dungeons. And as a Destruction Warlock, you don't have too many options. Really stupid little frogs. Oh, I didn't realize the boss was taking that much damage. Apparently, our arcane mage popped up. What's arcane echo? I don't know. Yeah, we just got cycloned by the stupid guy, so unless the healer dispels that, we can't do any damage for several seconds. Really sucks. We could use our Infernal here. Do I want to? Probably not.
We'll build a new world, free from their corruption.
Need to get behind the non-cracked ice block.
You're gonna get your death. You're gonna get your death. Nothing can stop.
Yeah, the Infernal does do AoE damage. But then also with the talents, it decreases Soul Shard costs for Rain of Fire and Chaos Bolt by 6 times. Instead of 3 Soul Shards, Rain of Fire becomes 2 Soul Shards, and then Chaos Bolt becomes 1 Soul Shard. So when you use it single target boss fight time, then the Infernal lets you cast several Chaos Bolts back to back to back to back, and it's freaking awesome. This area of this dungeon really is annoying. You got these stupid things which will line of sight you, give you line of sight problems because you're trying to always dodge this incoming wave, which randomly kicks aside each time. Drop the Infernal here because we also have talents for reducing the cooldown of your Infernal every time you spend Soul Shards. So she finished her shield cast there. We used our Hellhound pet though to purge the shield with the Devour Magic ability on the Hellhunter. So that, along with the ability to interrupt every, what's the interrupt cooldown? 24 seconds. Now this boss also has a terrible intermission. So if we don't kill him before that, then you gotta do a big long run and it sucks. And we got our Infernal ready for this. A bit more confident. Well, we barely got him. I haven't really paid attention. Maybe there's like an energy bar or something that you know when he's going to do the Infernal or the intermission thing. He like picks everybody up and shoots people in different directions, and you have to run all the way back to the boss while dodging a bunch of booby trap stuff. It's really annoying. But yeah, we didn't end up having to deal with that, so that's good. What did I even get anyways? Interesting. Crit, mastery, speed. Pretty much the same as my current chest piece. Yeah, but anyways. I underestimated how long it takes the Infernal to come back up, so we didn't even get to use it on the final boss there. That kind of sucked. But whatever. Let's get to looking at the Destruction Warlock talents and stuff. I really don't want to make a long video, and I haven't min-maxed this as much as some of the other specs in the game. So there's a lot more playing around with the talents that you could do on the Destruction Warlock, I think. Yeah, so as far as the general Warlock tree goes, you don't really do anything different than a Demonology Warlock. Like, you definitely want to get your Dark Pact. There's a bunch of survivability stuff in here if you have a pet, or your pet takes damage, and yeah, get some survivability up here and here for stamina increase, / max health stuff. I use the Mortal Coil, you know, AoE stun, the gateway. Yeah, nothing too special. Always get Burning Rush with the damage reduction so that you can move around faster. Have this nice little weak aura thing that shows me that it's still active, because sometimes I hit it to stop and it doesn't stop, but I don't realize that it didn't stop if I don't have that weak aura. Well, I noticed it like several seconds later. I'm like, why am I taking damage still? And then I'm like, oh, my Burning Rush is still going. So, yeah. Ability does sometimes fail to turn off. Really annoying. But yeah, let's look at actual damage stuff. So, as with all the Warlock specs, you have soul shards. And soul shards are used for some of your bigger, more important spells. And then there's some abilities that you have that generate soul shards. Now on the Demonology Warlock and the Affliction Warlock, I think both those you only have like whole soul shards, but on the Destruction Warlock that we're playing here, you have soul shard fragments, which is 10% of a soul shard. So you don't generate full soul shards at a time type of thing. You generate portions of soul shards, which is allows them to kind of better balance things, I guess you could say. Instead of them giving you like a 10% chance to generate a whole soul shard, then they can just give you a 100% chance to generate 10% of a soul shard. That sort of thing. So yeah. So like I said earlier, your soul shard spenders are mainly going to be Chaos Bolt, cost 2 soul shards for a big single target damage spell, which, like I said earlier, is weaker than it has been in the past. Chaos Bolt used to be hit like a truck type of thing. But these days it's definitely weaker. They kind of changed the design of it a little bit so that you can cast more Chaos Bolts. But because of that, they had to reduce some of the damage of it. But also, as mentioned, the Destruction Warlock is underpowered. It's like the bottom of the raid damage meters, and also performing pretty poorly in Mythic Plus dungeons. So there's a possibility it'll get some buffs, but the way the talents are like set up and stuff, I don't think we're really gonna get a heavy hitting Chaos Bolt back unless they do like some major talent rework type of thing. Just because with the current talents you can cast too many Chaos Bolts. So they'll probably just do more like a all-around damage buff of hopefully 10%, based on how poorly it's been doing. I don't think I did too bad in that dungeon, but yeah, the tank was 378 eye level in a heroic dungeon. That's more than M0 gear, so he's definitely yeah, definitely overgeared tank by well, depends what you want to call overgeared exactly in a heroic dungeon, but I generally say 350 is the point at which you should start doing Mythic 0 dungeons. A lot of people will start doing them earlier, but if I were to create dungeons, dungeon groups for Mythic 0, I would have it minimum item level 350, just because it's just so easy to get item level 350 that you're basically being lazy if you are trying to go into Mythic dungeons at less than 350 item level. So to some extent, you could basically say the tank was 2 tiers of gear higher than what it should be for a heroic dungeon. So yeah, The Arcane Mage was a little high, but he's still less than the 359 gear that the Heroic Dungeons actually give. So that's fine. And I didn't actually look at what the Devastation Evoker's gear was, but I think it was, you know, ballpark around the same as the Arcane Mage. Just I usually just take a glance at people's maximum health. So specifically about 200,000 health in a heroic dungeon with the 15% LFG bonus thing is generally kind of the starting point for heroic dungeons for people's health. Like a good item level, I should say, for people's health. But then you have talents, like I was saying earlier, with the Warlock talents, you have talents for extra stamina or just maximum health directly. In some classes, trees, which affects it, and also just what items people have those item levels on also is important. For example, if someone had a high item level trinket, they would have a higher item level, but the trinkets, except for trinkets, don't have stamina on them. So because of that, they could have a higher item level but still have the same amount of health as one with a lower item level. So things like that can make a difference. Also, weapons can make a big difference. So I don't know. It's would have been nice if we beat the tank on damage, but Destruction Warlock is not quite that good. Even, well, also Prot Warrior is really good, and like I said, he's overgeared. But yeah. Anyways, our overall damage, so we're spending single target damage. Well, let's look at boss fights. Single target damage, we're doing Chaos Bolts, and you'll see Chaos Bolts is like 40% of our damage. A lot of the time, if I am getting the Infernal down and being able to just cast Chaos Bolts at the boss. The frickin' frog boss one, he summoned the little frogs, and our teammates weren't really they're having problems as far as killing them goes. I don't know if the yeah, so you see here, well, we can actually look at enemy damage taken. So you see here, we did a lot more damage to the little frogs than our teammates did. So that's because the stupid little frogs put this stacking poison debuff on you, where if it reaches 10 stacks, you instantly die. So you can't ignore the little frogs. Sometimes you can just CC them and focus the boss. But ideally, you kind of just get them all clumped up and AoE them down. But if your teammates start running in different directions away from the frogs, then they get all spread out and you can't really kill them efficiently. So that was pretty much what happened. I was trying to kill a couple frogs there, but they were focus firing the boss, and the boss just died while the little frogs were up. But yeah, whatever. Things didn't go too well. Let's see. The third boss with the stupid ice block things. You can see we did almost 50% of our damage as Chaos Bolt. And that's just because we saved our Infernal. Use on the boss fight, and like I said, the Infernal lets you put out tons of Chaos Bolts. If the boss had like 3 times as much health or something, then our Chaos Bolt percentage of damage would go down quite a bit, because Infernal gets you reduced Chaos Bolt. I should say 1 Soul Shard Chaos Bolts for 6 Chaos Bolts, but after that, the Infernal generates some Soul Shard fragments the whole time also. So it's still very helpful for damage even after you use all your reduced cost Chaos Bolts, but yeah, the Chaos Bolts, machine gun Chaos Bolts kind of dries up after somewhere around 8 or so. Usually you start the fight with a few soul shards, and then you throw down the Infernal, then you start pumping out some Chaos Bolts. Usually you want to keep Conflagrate on cooldown. Conflagrate generates 5 Soul Shard fragments, in other words, half a Soul Shard. So it's for single target, it's your fastest way to generate Soul Shards. So yeah, you do want to use that ability even when you have the Infernal out, unless you're already at full Soul Shards. But yeah, so but what I was trying to get at is, so you get 6 reduced cost Chaos Bolts, and then after that your Chaos Bolts cost 2 again. So usually you can get a couple more of those out before you have to actually go to your basic Soul Shard generator ability, which is Incinerate. So yeah. I forgot also, Immolate is a damage over time, and that generates Soul Shard fragments also, which means that yeah, that also contributes. You wanna get that up at the start of the fight to so that it's generating Soul Shard fragments the whole time. Alright. So yeah, the third boss and last boss, I used the Infernal like on the pack before the mini boss, which was right before the boss, just so that we clear that stuff out faster. And because of the talent down here, For every soul shard you spend reduces the cooldown of Summon an Infernal by 1.5 seconds. Basically, Infernal's a 3-minute cooldown, but every Chaos Bolt that I'm doing at 2 soul shard cost reduces the cooldown of it by 3 seconds. So, in practice, Summon Infernal is more like a 2-minute cooldown with that talent down there. It'll definitely vary based on how much soul shards you can generate and spend. But yeah, treat it more like a 2-minute cooldown, basically. Let's see. So yeah. So final boss, we didn't have the Infernal up. Without the Infernal, that's basically our only single target damage cooldown whatsoever. So yeah. That's one of the things I like about the Destruction Warlock, similar to the Elemental Shaman, is that the consistent or sustained single target damage is fairly decent, not dependent on using some big cooldown to do burst damage. Like you can see, we did more damage than the tank on that final boss fight for single target, which is to be expected, but we did it without using any damage cooldowns. Whereas some other DPS classes will they do very poor damage without using cooldowns. Some of them, not all of them. Like the Frost Mage, for example, which you're looking at. If you don't use Rune of Power and you don't use Icy Veins, you don't use Frozen Orb, you don't use your Ray of Frost, you will be doing way much less impressive damage. The general Frost single target damage is the Frost Bolts, and then if you have a Fingers of Frost proc, then you use an Ice Lance. Use Flurry on cooldown for the Winter's Chill for 2 Ice Lances. So it's not that great compared to you can see here specifically Incinerate for the Destruction Warlock is actually pretty good. When you aren't generating, when you aren't using when you don't have Infernal to decrease Chaos Bolt costs so that you can pump tons of Chaos Bolts, use a lot of Incinerates to generate the Soul Shards for the Chaos Bolts. And Incinerate actually does like surprisingly good damage for a simple resource generator spell. This is definitely better than a frostbolt, for example, as far as just the raw damage of it. Frostbolt has those mechanics that go with it for the generating the icicle and whatnot, but Incinerate itself just does good damage. Let's see. Yeah, so we looked at boss damage stuff. Chaos Bolt is typically gonna be your highest thing, and then you'll do conflagrates, incinerates, and you'll keep your immolate dot up, and that's really all there is to it. Very simple spec to play, unless you get some of the other things. We'll talk about those a bit. But yeah, overall, in a dungeon, you'll usually do pretty on the weak side, and it's usually you can pretty much keep up, like we saw here, on a single target fight. If you get your Infernal down so that you can pump out the Chaos Bolts. But there's some fights are just terror bad for Destruction Warlock, because Destruction Warlock is really lacking in the ability to cast while moving. So the flag rate's instant cast, so you can move for a second and a half during a conflagrate to dodge little things, but you don't have any kind of big cast while moving type of abilities that some other classes get, like the Elemental Shaman has Spirit Walker's Grace, I think it's called, which is like 15 seconds of casting while moving. So as a Destruction Warlock, you don't have that, so if you have to move a lot, it becomes a lot of time where you are doing 0 damage. So that's one of the main reasons Destruction Warlock has problems. But it's also that the AoE of the Destruction Warlock is definitely definitely struggles. So look at our overall damage again. So Chaos Bolt was top, Immolate was second. So Immolates are damage over time, and the reason Immolate was second is because we're using the Cataclysm talent here, which deals some damage in AoE and applies Immolate to all the enemies it hits. So you cast it on the ground, it goes boom, and then all the enemies in that area will be affected by Immolate. And because Immolate damage generates soul shard fragments, it is extremely important to get this talent in dungeons or this talent in dungeons. Either one. The other one is that Rain of Fire actually generates soul shard fragments from damage. And this is very similar to Frostmage Blizzard in that the more enemies you hit with it, the more value you get out of it. Just like how Frostmage Blizzard reduces the cooldown of Frozen Orb. So this talent is extremely useful if there's a lot of enemies. Then you can actually just purely spam Rain of Fires and they will generate enough soul shards that you don't really need to even worry about anything else. But it's also has the exact same weakness of Frostmage in that if there's only a few targets, then the Rain of Fire it won't generate enough soul shards to be worthwhile. So this talent's very dependent on there being lots of enemies to use the Rain of Fire on. Whereas Cataclysm is a much safer choice if there's like 3 enemies. So that's why I always get Cataclysm. Highly recommend Cataclysm. It's not that this other talent isn't viable. It's just it's only useful when there's lots of enemies. So when there's like 3 enemies, Cataclysm gives you a lot more value than Inferno. So it's, yeah. Let's see. Yeah, so as far as talents go... Or wait, did we finish talking about all the damage? So yeah. That was why Immolate was second on the damage. Rain of Fire comes after that. I haven't done the math in a while to see really how much Rain of Fire you should be using. So I think it was... Holy shit. The sound effects were really loud. From the guy PvP. So let's see. Yeah, we can do the math real quick. So Rain of Fire does, with my current gear, 8,000 damage per target, assuming they stand in the Rain of Fire the entire time. That costs 3 soul shards. So we bring up the calculator, 8,000 damage per target per 3 soul shards is 2, and yeah, that much damage per target per soul shard. So if you compare that to Chaos Bolt, well, you can see here Chaos Bolt's 23,000. So if there were 3 enemies in the Rain of Fire, it would do 24,000 damage compared to a 23,000 Chaos Bolt. But Rain of Fire costs 1 extra soul shard over a Chaos Bolt. Go away. So Chaos Bolts is 23,000 divided by 2 soul shards. which is 11,500 damage per soul shard. Which means if we go back to this one, I think there was some way we did before where you go back to this. Yeah. So the per soul shard amount, actually let's do it this way. We will invert it. I don't think that did quite what we wanted. Let's do it this way. 3 over 8,000 times 11,500. So the way the math works out is that if there's 4.3 enemy targets, then you should rain a fire. But that basically means that Chaos Bolt, if there's 4 enemy targets or less, you should Chaos Bolt instead of rain of fire, because it'll do more damage per soul shard. 4 enemies or less. But there's something else you have to consider, which is this thing called Havoc. So Havoc is a spell which is sort of like sweeping strikes on the Arms Warrior, where for some amount of time your abilities will hit another nearby target. So you can get Havoc itself, and it's just like sweeping strikes, where it's a 30-second cooldown and it lasts for 15 seconds. And you see here it does 60% of normal damage on the duplicated spell. Or you can use this other talent, which is new ever since the for the new talent system for Dragonflight. So it was in Dragonflight pre-patch. It was bugged in Dragonflight pre-patch for a while though. It's your single target spells have a chance to apply Havoc to a random nearby enemy for 5 seconds. So I've been playing with this one. It's probably not great, but the point here is that we said that Chaos Bolt is better to use than Rain of Fire if there are 4 or fewer targets. But there's the caveat to that is if Havoc is up, Havoc doesn't do anything for Rain of Fire, but Havoc will duplicate your Chaos Bolt at 60% damage. So we have to consider our calculations if Havoc is up. Oops. Let's go back to this one. And let's see. So instead of 23,000 damage, it's going to be doing 23,000 times 1.6. I did 2,300. 23,000 times 1.6 total damage from that Chaos Bolt, split from the Havoc. So you do that much damage divided by 2, which is that much damage per soul shard. And then, so comparing that to the Rain of Fire, We do the 3 over 8,000. So in that case, Rain of Fire, if you have Havoc up, you shouldn't Rain of Fire unless there's 7 or more targets. Because at 6 targets, your duplicated Chaos Bolt makes Chaos Bolt that much more efficient. So it's so yeah, it's kind of weird in that because of that, all in all, Rain of Fire isn't very important to the Destruction Warlock's build, because it takes so many targets for it to be always better than Chaos Bolt. So it's yeah, it's very interesting. But because of that, yeah, you use lots of Chaos Bolts, not as much Rain of Fire. We got Incinerates on there, and you probably saw Incinerates. We're using a talent, where is it? Here. We're using the talents for Incinerates. Now hit all enemies near your target for 25% damage. So that greatly increases the amount of Incinerate damage you do in general in a dungeon. And then we got the Cataclysm, which has its upfront damage, which is pretty decent upfront damage. But like I said earlier, the applying immolates to all the targets is more important, just because it generates so many soul shards for you to do like Chaos Bolts and stuff. And then Conflagrate, which, like I said, that's our instant cast cooldown based soul shard generator. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Got the Infernal on there also. Interesting. So that's in the entire dungeon, the Infernal did 5% of our total damage. Interesting. That's more than these random summon pet type of things usually do in the grand scheme of things. Usually they are pretty good when you use them for like single target fights. Part of it's just because Infernal, the immolate on the Infernal does a good amount of AoE damage if you're using it on AoE trash pack between bosses. So yeah. But anyways, so yeah, like I said, so all in all, the Rain of Fire is not very important. So you could be tempted to not even get Rain of Fire, and you can build an entire build where you don't even get Rain of Fire. But the problem is you have to get Rain of Fire really to get to Cataclysm in the first place. So because like I said, if you don't have one of these, it's just not really viable in a dungeon, because you need one of them to generate lots of soul shards for you. So yeah, I've tried without Rain of Fire. It's not really viable. just because these talents are mandatory in dungeons. So let's see here. Yeah, we'll talk about all this talent stuff. So there's talents here for immolate damage and here for immolate duration. Those are extremely important if you are going Cataclysm. Well, I shouldn't say extremely important. They are, well, the improved immolate one, this one's more important as far as the duration ends up giving you more soul shards because it lasts longer, so it ticks more. Each tick gives you a soul shard. So, or a soul shard fragment or whatever they call it. So this talent is more important than immolate damage, but both of them are very worthwhile if you are going Cataclysm. For as far as single target goes, like on a boss, let's go back to this boss. You can see immolate was like 10% of our total damage. So the 2 points to get 25% more damage is not very good for a single target use only. And the duration of immolate doesn't really do anything for you in single target. You just have to recast it slightly less often. So those talents are very specific to choosing Cataclysm, and if you were to not choose Cataclysm, those talents would probably be better spent elsewhere. I would probably take off the damage before I took off the duration. But because the duration's for the generating the soul shards, so if you're manually putting up immolates, you probably want duration more than you want this damage for regular monster packs. For boss damage, well, like I said, for boss damage, neither of them are very good as far as damage per point. So yeah, it's very AoE based there. Yeah, that's that stuff for AoE. And incinerate damage being AoE, I don't really know exactly how much this ends up being, because it doesn't the AoE portion of your incinerate damage doesn't show up as a separate thing in the damage meters. So I'm not sure how this actually works out. But it feels like it does a lot to have your incinerate doing AoE, and I think you really want at least one point here. Kind of a 1-point wonder, because incinerate generates soul shard fragments plus an additional one on critical strikes. So we're gonna start looking at rotation kind of thing a little bit here, and if we have it hit multiple targets, when it crits on those additional targets, as far as I can tell, it generates extra soul shard fragments for each target, each extra target that the incinerate crits. I think that's how it works, because you'll see the soul shard fragments. I'm only using Rain of Fire to spend soul shards, by the way. I don't have the talent where it'll generate soul shard fragments. So this is all incinerate. So you'll see sometimes the soul shard fragments jumps up a little, and sometimes it jumps up significantly more. And that's specifically because we have the AoE. Oh, my stupid pet is attacking the thing. Come on, let's get out of combat so we can look at talents again. So yeah, that's kind of it's kind of a 1-point wonder as far as generating extra soul shard fragments. But yeah, just the overall damage that you deal with incinerate when it's AoE, it's fairly fairly good. Not amazing, but as far as being able to generate your resource with an AoE ability, it's pretty nice. So your other AoE option is Channel Demon Fire. So Channel Demon Fire is you put an immolate on one or more enemies, and when you Channel Demon Fire, it shoots out a bunch of little bolts which deal single target damage to that enemy and a small amount of splash damage. Now, if the enemies are spread out and then you use Channel Demon Fire, then it'll shoot some bolts at different enemies and the splash damage won't reach each other. So in those sort of situations, Channel Demon Fire is a really bad AoE ability. So I'm not sure what the optimal usage of Channel Demon Fire is. Like, is it worth just doing an immolate on a single enemy in the pack that's like in the middle somewhere, and then Channel Demon Fire, and then put your thank you. I'm not sure if it's worth doing your Channel Demon Fire with only one enemy on the immolate so that you can make sure all the bolts go to the same enemy type of thing. But you're like missing out on if you chose Cataclysm, you're missing out on the ability to get value out of the immolates on the targets by using Cataclysm right away. So Channel Demon Fire doesn't spend or generate any soul shards. Yeah, it's just overall it's like not terrible, but it is a cooldown spell that's it's definitely not great. So I'm not really a fan of it. So yeah, that's basically all your AoE stuff that you can get. And then single target, like I said, is you apply your immolate, you use conflagrates on cooldown because that's your fastest way to generate soul shard fragments. Use your incinerates to also generate soul shard fragments, but they're not as good as conflagrates because it's just a slower cast time. And then use chaos bolts to just use those soul shards as you can. So yeah, what other talents are in here? There's ones over here where chaos bolts. So I picked this one where your spells have a chance to grant you 15% haste for 8 seconds. Now, so obviously that's pretty good as far as 15% haste is pretty good. But so is this other talent, which is Chaos Bolt consumes up to 5 seconds of immolate's damage over time, instantly dealing that much damage. So that makes your Chaos Bolts do more damage, but then you have to reapply your immolates more often. So for a boss fight, this is definitely pretty good. But the I'm not a big fan of the what's that stupid term? Kind of the user experience, I'm getting distracted by all these sounds in the background of people. What's that term? Quality of life. I'm not a fan of the sort of the loss of quality of life in that you have to apply your immolates more often so that you can keep them constantly up. So yes, it makes your chaos bolts do more damage, but 5 seconds of immolate damage is like 5k damage. So it's yeah, it's like a 20 to 25% increase damage of the chaos bolts at the cost of having to apply lots more immolates. Doesn't seem that good to me. Whereas haste buff helps you a lot, particularly with mayhem. So let's go back in here. So mayhem only lasts 5 seconds, right? So your single target spells, which includes incinerate still, even if you have the AoE part on it. So it'll be incinerate or conflagrate. Either of those has a 35% chance to put this 5-second havoc on enemies. And where a haste buff and haste in general helps a lot is that you have that havoc up. Let's get it up again. Come on, 35% chance. And ideally, you can get 2 chaos bolts off, so that both chaos bolts get split to different targets, and it's like big damage. But if you don't have enough haste, it's very hard to get 2 chaos bolts off in that short amount of time, because the chaos bolt is a 2.7 second cast, and like we said, the the Havoc only lasts 5 seconds when it's procced with that one talent. So there's other things that help us with cast speed that can help us get those 2 Chaos Bolts in that short amount of time. And sometimes you just have to give up on getting 2 Chaos Bolts out. So one thing that's really useful to do is sometimes you just say, screw it, we're not getting 2 Chaos Bolts up. For example, maybe you don't even have the Soul Shards for 2 Chaos Bolts. So instead, you might use a couple Conflagrates. And the reason is because the Conflagrates get duplicated with the Havoc, and instead of generating half a Soul Shard each, instead of generating half a Soul Shard with Conflagrate, both of them generate half a Soul Shard. So you actually get a whole Soul Shard every time you cast Conflagrate while Havoc is up. So yeah, you can build your Soul Shards up much quicker while you have Havoc up. And then it works a little different as far as Incinerate goes when Havoc is up. I'm not sure exactly how it works. I haven't studied it too closely for as far as generating Soul Shards goes. But what I do know is that the damage, you don't get 60% extra damage from Incinerate when Havoc is up if you have this AoE damage talent for Incinerate. What happens is you have it's probably this one here. So what happens with the Incinerate is Havoc makes a single target thing hit for 60% damage, right? So with Incinerate, it doesn't send out a second Incinerate with 60% damage and then another AoE version of that Incinerate for 25% of that 60% damage. It doesn't do that. What it does is it just shoots out a regular Incinerate, except for instead of the one doing full damage and then all the other ones doing 25% damage, it does one at full damage. The duplicated one to the Havoc target is at 60% damage, and then all the other ones do 25% damage. So as far as damage goes, Incinerate while Havoc is up gives you actually only a very small increase to the to your overall damage output. So it's not very good. You really want to use Conflagrates and Chaos Bolts if you can. So yeah, let's see what other talents. So yeah, I said I don't like Channel Demon Fire. There's this Shadow Burn thing, which is actually one of my favorite execute type of abilities in the game. Specifically because if the enemy dies within 5 seconds of you using it, then it resets the cooldown of it, and it gives you a soul shard. Well, it costs a soul shard though. So, but yeah, the cooldown reset of it is just really important. If you compare it to other executes in the game, like Warrior Execute or what's that Shadow Priest one called? Something death. Or is it death something? It's got the word death in it. Shadow Word Death, I think is it. So those ones, you use it on a low health target. Oh, also there's the kill shot for hunters. But all of them, you use them on a low health target, and they do lots of damage, but they don't reset their own cooldown type of thing like Shadowburn does. So I really do like how Shadowburn works. But the damage of it isn't really enough to justify using it. Justify spending talent points on it, I should say. As you can see here, it's 5.7k damage with a 50% extra crit chance. If you compare that to Incinerate, it's essentially about as much damage as a Incinerate if you factor in the crit chance. With the Incinerate not hitting extra nearby enemies. So I like how it works. I just don't like it's not enough damage to choose it. Now here on the left side there's this big old spell called Soulfire, which is basically another Chaos Bolt, but it doesn't cost soul shards. It actually generates a soul shard, but it's on a 45-second cooldown, and it has a 3.6 second cast. So really it's more like a fire mage casting a non-instant cast pyroblast. It's just really slow. And because the cast time is so long and because of that cooldown, it's just not worth getting. There's a thing down here where you can reduce the cooldown of it by using some of their spells, but it's not reliable enough, I guess you could say, to worth spending talent points on it because of that long cast time still. So, and the way you reduce the cooldown of it, the enemy has to have 50% or less health. So you only get that cooldown reduction in the second half of a boss fight. So it's just not like universally usable. So yeah, none of those talents I think are worth the talent points. We didn't really talk about these other ones up here. So you really want this. Conflagrate reduces the cast time of your next Incinerate, Chaos Bolt, or Soulfire by 30%. Some of these guys' spell abilities and shit are way too loud. So this is important to have. Conflagrate, reducing cast time of your Incinerate Chaos Bolt. I would kind of wish it didn't reduce the cast time of my next Incinerate, just because it's so useful on reducing the cast time of Chaos Bolt. Specifically, like we said earlier, that you're trying to get 2 Chaos Bolts off during this proc Havoc time. So it would be really nice if you could just like store up faster cast Chaos Bolts to make that happen very easily. But because it also works on Incinerate, it's kind of somewhat wasted on Incinerate. So yeah, unfortunate. Reducing the cooldown of Conflagrate helps. I don't know exactly how important that is, but like I said earlier, it is an instant cast, decent damage, and good soul shard generation. So reducing the cooldown is definitely a good idea. And then over here, Conflagrate gets an additional charge. I'm a big fan in general of additional charges on things. So 3 charges instead of 2 charges. So you can just kind of spam Conflagrates a little bit more in some situations because you have that extra charge of it. Yeah, not sure if that other talent's very good. So yeah, let's see. So if you are casting Incinerates, your Incinerates, and then your Havoc comes up, you can cast, if you don't think you're going to get off 2 Chaos Bolts, like if you don't react quickly enough, you won't be able to get 2 Chaos Bolts off. You can do a Conflagrate and then a Chaos Bolt, and then in that case the Conflagrate is increasing the, or sorry, decreasing the cast time of the Chaos Bolt because of that talent, which means that that Chaos Bolt comes out significantly faster. So, but if you can kind of play the lottery, which is you can just sort of gamble on your Conflagrate triggering the Havoc. So you can be like, I'm feeling good, I'm thinking my Conflagrate's gonna trigger the Havoc, and then I can cast my Chaos Bolts right away. And if that happens, you can definitely get off 2 Chaos Bolts inside the Havoc time. So I'm just gonna hit that, and we saw it actually came up right away. And I was a little slow, but you can definitely get the let's get some soul shards up again so that we have enough for 2 Chaos Bolts. I'll show, we can definitely get 2 Chaos Bolts off in that amount of time. If we need a little more soul shards, you have to do it when you have enough soul shards, of course, for a or the 2 Chaos Bolts. So we can do 1, 2, 3, and on the third one we got it. So you saw there we got the 2 Chaos Bolts out in that sequence. It was on our third conflagrate that Havoc triggered. And if you notice there at the end, the Havoc triggered with the second Chaos Bolt set that we shot. This is this happens sometimes, and the thing is the Havoc that triggers from that talent called Mayhem, it can't trigger while it is currently up, but it decides when the spell, it decides if the spell is splitting when you finish casting the spell. So the Chaos Bolts cast finished while the Havoc was up, so it's still split, but the existing Havoc completed while the Chaos Bolt was in transit to the target. So by the time the Chaos Bolt hit the target, the Havoc was up. So at that time, it was able to start a new Havoc again. So that's what happened there. Yeah, it's nice when that happens, because then you can get more stuff going with your Havocs. So if you notice that, if you don't have soul shards to do another Chaos Bolt, you can still like throw in a conflagrate or something to well, ideally a conflagrate, otherwise you'll basically just use incinerates to get a little bit of value out of that that next Havoc that happened to trigger. Alright. So yeah, there's some talents down here, and you've kind of got two options. One is the Infernal side, which is you summon the Infernal, which deals a bunch of AoE damage, generates soul shard fragments, and the talents here, like I said, reduce the cost of your Chaos Bolts so that you can pump out Chaos Bolts, or Rain of Fire if you wish. But your other, and reduce the cooldown of it. But the other side is essentially every so many Chaos Bolts or Rain of Fires, you get a free Chaos Bolt or Rain of Fire. So that side's pretty nice. And then at the bottom here is when you get that free one, it'll also summon out a purple infernal guy called Blasphemy. He's basically the exact same as an infernal, but he only lasts 8 seconds instead of 30 seconds. So yeah, that side is, if you want to go like full no damage cooldowns mode on your Destruction Warlock, you can do that. But I really like having the ability to pump out a bunch of Chaos Bolts in quick succession, so that's why I go to the Infernal side. So these other talents are not super important. They're kind of just required to get down to whichever side you want to get to. But this one's important. Incinerate now generates 100% additional soul shard fragments. I don't know how you would ever survive without that. And then this talent's really good, where Chaos Bolt increases the damage of Chaos Bolt by 25% and reduces the cast time of Chaos Bolt by 20% for 4 seconds. This is very important for trying to squeeze those 2 Chaos Bolts into a single triggered Havoc thing. But also just increases the average damage of your Chaos Bolts, especially when you're pumping them out during Infernal. So yeah, in general, you don't want to get to 2 soul shards and then throw out a Chaos Bolt. It's better to get out to 4 soul shards so that you can throw out 2 Chaos Bolts quickly in a row, so that the second one gets the reduced cast time and 25% increased damage. But yeah, like I said, when you do Infernal and then you're casting several Chaos Bolts in a short amount of time, then all of them except the first one have the 25% increased damage and 20% reduced cast time. So it's very good synergy with that. Well, not specifically the Infernal, but with the one that reduces the cost of Chaos Bolt. And then at the very bottom here, your talents, there's this weird damage cooldown one that's not very good. It's a 45-second cooldown for single target damage, which is I don't know. The damage of it's not very good. It's a damage over time or a like Chaos Bolt basically, which I don't know why they created this ability. It's just really strange. But I've tried it. It's only single target damage and it's just not very good. So yeah, I don't know. The other one here though is Chaos Bolt, Rain of Fire, and Shadowburn always gain maximum benefits of mastery. What is the Destruction Warlock mastery? It's you get a random amount of extra damage plus a flat amount of extra damage. So your spells deal 17.2% increased damage plus a random amount of a random amount of up to 17.2% additional increased damage. So let's say I had, instead of 17.2%, let's say that this was 20% plus an additional random amount of 20% additional damage. So that would mean all my spells deal at minimum 20% additional damage and maximum 40% additional damage, which means on average they would do 30% additional damage. But specifically with this talent, then your Chaos Bolt and Rain of Fire will always do the full 40% additional damage. Now specifically what we care about most is Chaos Bolt, because that's the highest percentage of your damage, especially in single target fights. So doing 40% damage, 40% increased damage instead of a average of 30% increased damage, which is halfway between 20 and 40, of course, is a pretty good DPS increase from that one point. So we saw overall in a dungeon Chaos Bolt was like 20% of my damage or so. We screwed up the damage meters, of course, by hitting the training enemies a bunch, but let's say it was 20% damage in the dungeon was Chaos Bolt. That single point gives you takes you from 30% increased damage to 40% increased damage, so the math would be 1.4 divided by 1.3 is, well, my mastery isn't those numbers, but if I had the numbers I was talking about, it would be a 7% damage increase on the Chaos Bolt, which is times by 0.2 because it's 20% of my damage in the dungeon, which in total is, sorry, let me back up here. 1.4 1.3 is that we will subtract 1, we'll multiply by 100, so that much damage increase of Chaos Bolts from that talent. And then the Chaos Bolts, when they're doing 20% of my total damage in the dungeon, multiply that by 0.2, and we see I get a 1.5% increase total damage in the dungeon from that point, which isn't great. But if you consider single target damage on a boss fight, if how do we go back to that number? Is there an easy way to go back? Yeah. So on a single target boss fight, if I am doing a 45%, sorry, I want 0.45. If 45% of my damage on the boss fight is increased by 7%, then that single point for single target damage is a almost 3.5% damage increase on boss fights. So this is a very strong single target damage talent point. Very nice. Usually most talents that I've seen are like 2% damage or so on single target damage. Just because they are trying to generally balance these things from what I've seen around raids. So very few talent points give you more than a 2% damage increase for single target damage. But that one happens to be particularly strong. So that's why we get that talent point there. But yeah. Like I said, if you were to not go Cataclysm, you could get rid of some of these immolate points and spend them elsewhere. You can't really get down here though. Well, you can't really get down here and also get both these really good Chaos Bolt talents and the Infernal talents. It's you have to have a certain amount of stuff above, and it's yeah, you get some of it, but not quite all of it. So it's yeah. You can mess around a bit with the talent points, but fairly happy with how this plays. The overall, the AoE is the main struggle point for the Destruction Warlock. Cataclysm's pretty decent, but Rain of Fire feels undertuned, and and then when Cataclysm's on cooldown, because you use it like on one monster pack and then it's not off a cooldown for the next monster pack type of thing, then you feel really gimped at that point. Those 30-second cooldowns are just a little too long in the typical dungeon situation. If you're doing like Mythic plus Fortified, then a 30-second cooldown's alright. In that the monsters live longer, so it'll be up in time for the next pull. But it's not enough that you get like 100% uptime on the immolates from the Cataclysm. Even though we have the increased duration on the immolates still lasts 24 seconds compared to a 30-second cooldown. So yeah, a little bit of struggles on the Warlock AoE. And yeah, that's just a it's mostly a resource generation. The total damage of the Cataclysm plus the immolates is not impressive for a 30-second cooldown. Like, it's not the ability to do any sort of sustained AoE damage is very poor. But yeah, like I said, I think it's mostly the fault of Rain of Fire being really weak for its cost. If Rain of Fire was like a 2 soul shard thing, then you'd be able to do 50% more Rain of Fires, and that would be freaking sweet. Because 8,000 damage over 7.3 seconds is so bad. But anyways, let's just end the video here. We are done talking about anything important, so yeah, end the video. Good night. Destruction Warlock. Terrible. Needs a 10% buff, maybe more.